We know it was a terrible day that changed everything. But how do we comprehend what happened to all those people smiling out at us from the missing posters? How do we explain the accident of survival or sudden heroism? This morning, we try.
That was Martha Teichner 20 years ago, trying to make sense of the unimaginable, the attacks of 9/11. All these years later, she tells us, that task hasn't gotten any easier.
I was walking to work and all of a sudden I see a jet crash.
Oh my God, another plane has just hit another building.
For anyone who lived through it, 9/11 will always be one of those I will never forget where I was moments.
Send every available ambulance, everything you got to the World Trade Center now.
Oh my goodness, there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon.
4 crashed planes. Nearly 3,000 dead.
It's crazy. It's nightmares. Armageddon right here.
After 20 years, the poison of the time-release horror is still as toxic as ever, is still spreading, is still history in the making.
It's another Pearl Harbor for this country.
You know, it's impossible not to compare this with the attack on Pearl Harbor.
A Pearl Harbor moment with the expectation of a World War II kind of victory to follow? Was it World War II or Vietnam?
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there.
With those words, President George W. Bush launched a war with no end date, taking the fight first to Afghanistan to topple the Taliban regime, which had harbored al-Qaeda and 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden. We've watched in real time how that just ended in chaos.
I was 21 years old on 9/11.
Eager to right a wrong, Elliot Ackerman became a decorated Marine and intelligence officer and deployed 5 times to Afghanistan and Iraq.
The September 11th happens. We're telling ourselves these stories about the Second World War, and we go to try to fight a war that's in that type of a paradigm. The paradigm doesn't fit.
Ackerman writes about war now as a veteran who sees the last 20 years as sacrifice squandered.
There's an old bit of gallows humor amongst Marines and soldiers. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
9/11.
9/11 who?
I thought you said you never forget.
But that's pretty scary.
And that's a bit of gallows humor when you're sitting there in Afghanistan in 2012 and 2013 getting shot at, and you know the country doesn't care.
The war on terror has been fought far away in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also in Syria, Pakistan, and elsewhere, fought by an all-volunteer army, not an entire nation's sons and daughters. So, invisible to most Americans. Although 7,000 service members have lost their lives.
How do you fight a war on terror? You're basically fighting for something to not happen.
Another 9/11 hasn't happened. In 2011, we got bin Laden. But here we are, at 20 years and counting.
Water is very special.
We first met Lee Ielpi 5 years ago, before the 15th anniversary, as he showed us his son's name on the memorial at Ground Zero to those who died. It's like holy water.
Yeah, exactly.
For ILP, the meaning of 9/11 is and always has been personal, about this place on that day.
My son Jonathan, New York City firefighter, called and said, turn the TV on.
The first plane had hit.
Jonathan said, they're sending us to the World Trade Center. I said, okay, buddy, be careful. And he said, okay. And that was the last time I spoke to my son.
By the time the North Tower collapsed, Lee ILP, a retired firefighter himself, was racing to the site.
I asked them, everybody, did you see my son? The answer was no, no, no. Then I started meeting dads. Did you see my son? No. So we walked together. Eventually there were 8 of us that would meet up every day.
For 9 months, together, they clawed through the rubble, searching for their firefighter sons. Lee ILP kept going back, even after Jonathan's body was recovered. 343 New York City firefighters died on 9/11. A symbolic stand-in for all of them, Jonathan ILP's battered gear. Lee ILP gave his son's coat and helmet to the 9/11 Tribute Museum, which he helped to found, so the next generation would understand. In 2021, do they? He thinks no.
And I love talking to young people. And I'll ask a student or 2 or 3 or 4, what does 9/11 mean to you? And the answer is, what is 9/11?
We checked. Only 14 states require 9/11 instruction. How it's taught, or if it's taught at all, is mostly up to individual districts and schools.
One of the things that I discovered is that a lot of adults are still so traumatized by 9/11 that they don't want to talk about it. So in fact, when I was writing Towers Falling, it was a very hard journey.
Young adult author Jewell Parker Rhodes sees herself among the writers and educators finally beginning to grapple with 9/11.
If you look at 9/11 literature, we're building a canon that you can start in elementary and all the way up move to more increasingly complicated, well-told stories about the legacy of 9/11 and the time that we spent in Afghanistan.
Towers Falling was one of 2 9/11 books assigned as summer reading to middle school students at Queens Grant Community School in Mint Hill, North Carolina, outside Charlotte.
How do you feel looking at these photos and hearing the bit of the story that we just read?
For an entire week,
my aunt was actually in New York working, and my mom was super scared because she couldn't talk to her.
in nearly every class,
I'm going to give you 10 minutes to build our little towers.
kids who weren't born on 9/11.
My uncle worked downtown, and he had to run away from the building.
Tried to grasp what happened. Because it's the 20th anniversary, that's why Queens Grant took its deep dive into 9/11 this year.
Do you think your parents are ever going to forget 9/11? What happens after your parents are gone? Who's going to remember?
It makes me cry, but it's good.
Lee ILP lives in Florida now. This memorial, not far from his home, has his son's name on it.
It keeps them alive. It keeps Jonathan alive.
But will names on granite and a mangled hunk of World Trade Center steel be enough? He can only hope so. Why does having steel bring meaning?
Because we have nothing else. But this tells a story, a powerful story.
A big forklift brought it out to us, and so secured it to the trailer, covered it with American flag, and started our journey home.
Wauseon, Ohio firefighter, now Chief Rick Sluter, had never been to New York City. When he and several colleagues went there, to collect this nearly 2-ton piece of North Tower steel from Hangar 17 at JFK Airport, where the awful wreckage of 9/11 was kept.
You're in awe of, oh, you know, man, that's a big piece of steel. That's a big responsibility.
How big a responsibility became clear as the men drove the beam across northern Ohio.
You get groups of people around it in different towns we stopped in that would just stand and look at it, touch it, and hug it. They were along the route with flags, cheering, and fire departments from that jurisdiction would escort us. And it was like that the whole way back to Wauseon. People just say it was just really emotional, you know, seeing it, being able to touch the beam. They just want to walk up and feel it.
This is the monument Wauseon and neighboring fire departments built in the middle of the county fairgrounds, surrounded by corn and soybean fields, 600 miles from the World Trade Center. Why did you feel so strongly about wanting a piece of that in Wauseon?
Because it didn't just happen in New York or Washington, D.C. or Pennsylvania, it happened to the nation.
And in this riven piece of steel, and the nearly 500 others like it all across the country. The violence of that day lives on.